Okay, now, our next speaker on stage is going to share her insights all about the future of work. So when I say that to you, I'm sure many things pop up in your mind about where you're working now, where you're going to work in the future, 10 years' time, where you want to be, and how the landscape of where we work, why we work, who we work for, certainly changes rapidly for the future. Now, the next speaker, in fact, I actually met her at the same event in Latvia about 3 months ago. We were actually in the same taxi about midnight going to our hotels. We had a good chat. She told me all about what she does, and I asked her for her business card. She actually didn't have any more business cards in her pocket, but what she gave me was she gave me this luggage tag, this blue little luggage tag. Now, since I met her, I've actually popped this on my luggage, on my little luggage. Every 10 days I'm on a plane, literally, and it goes with me everywhere I go. So I see this pretty much all the time. So I'm delighted to meet her once again here at another event in Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the CEO and founder of Jobbatical, Ms. Karoli Hindriks.
Yes, I'm very glad the luggage tag has gone a long way. And when we are talking about the future of work, I think we have to understand the past. And I will start with a fun fact of the past. I'm actually on stage second time in Hanover during my life. And the first time in Hanover on the stage was the first time I was ever on any stage. It was year 2000. It was Expo 2000, and I was in the finals of European Student Company competition. The world was very different back then. I'm coming from a small country in Northern Europe called Estonia. We came with this tiny bus, and this picture was taken actually 10 minutes before the stage presence. And then, since we didn't win, we went back to our tiny bus, rolled toward Tallinn, and I was crying the whole way because winning was the most important thing back then. But when we look at the history a little bit more, then when we talk about the future of work in Europe, let's talk about where Europe comes from. And again, it's good to kind of refer to my personal experience. And I was born behind the wall. My childhood was spent largely behind a wall, and because my country was occupied by the Soviet Union. And what does it mean to live behind a wall? It meant being away from knowledge, being not allowed to dream, being away from anything from the rest of the world. And this picture actually, some of you may recognize Michael Jackson. That was my first time when I identified that there are people of other colors, other cultures, different than the blue-eyed blonde people I have been seeing around my neighborhood. And the story is actually funny because my grandmother managed, despite of that thick wall, the thickest wall probably in Europe, European history, she managed to fall in love in a Swedish sailor and escape to Sweden. And when she was finally KGB allowed her to visit Estonia, she, as all crannies all over the world, she smuggled in important things from the outside world. Like, for example, Heinz ketchup and Michael Jackson's Thriller. So that was when I discovered the world is not what I see in my neighborhood. And with this transition from my childhood, I also saw what happens when the isolation, when the wall comes down, so to say. What happens when you're suddenly living in a society where you're allowed to dream, where you're allowed to travel? And I got a dream myself. When I was a teenager again, it was actually 5 days after the Hanover presentation, I managed to fulfill my dream to go and study in America. And it was approximately half a year when I had been living in the United States when I started to realize the impact this experience had on my personal life. Then suddenly you see the things that used to be black or blue might be white. There are much more colors and much more understandings, again, than back at home in my neighborhood. But just to remind you what was happening in the world in 2001, then it seems like not so long time ago, but that was the time when mixtapes were not museum exhibits yet. It was also the time when there was a recipe for success, when corporate was not a bad word, when people designed their lives based on a recipe which included right education, right location, and then the right company. And your future was clear. The clouds were gone and sun was shining. But just recently, it was very funny, one CEO who had been running a media company for over 15 years, he told me, 10 years ago when I was interviewing candidates, and I was telling them, so right now you're starting from here, and in 5 years you may be here, and you saw the enlightenment, the inspiration, the blush, and the person was excited about the future. Today, when I tell the candidates about 5 years, you might be still working in our company, they will look at the door and try to get out from there very fast. So why do candidates look at the door today? And I think one of the things again, when looking at the journey towards the future of work, we have to think what has happened. And one of the big things that has happened is the fact that the recipe of success failed. In the financial crisis, suddenly you had millions of people who had followed the exact dotted line to success. The thing that we had learned will guarantee us good life. It appeared to be a myth. So it meant that the myth about the job security was busted. And no wonder if you look at today, last summer Accenture made a study on the university graduates in the United States. And everybody was asked the question, what is the single most important thing for you when choosing your first jobs? And let's not forget, United States, big loans, you know that you don't have experience, but you still have to pay your loans. The single most answered reason or choice, what people said that they will make their choice based on that is that the job that they will take, the first job they will take, has to make a difference. And so what it actually means is that we have a workforce who is the most entrepreneurial workforce we have ever seen. People are willing to take big steps to help to build our visions. For entrepreneurs and for founders, for CEOs, it's actually the greatest era to build teams. What also has happened within the past 10, 15 years, something that didn't exist when I was sitting in New Hampshire in 2000. I was an Estonian going to the United States and then going back, and we lived in our corner of the world. Whereas today, the comfort zones, through the networks, the comfort zones of people have just expanded across the globe. So today, my friends in India or Australia or America or Germany might be much more my people than anybody living around my neighborhood. So suddenly friendships have become global, which means people are free and comfortable to move around. And just similarly, Wall Street Journal just lately noted that the highly skilled members of the next generation appear to be less tied to any particular location or national identity. So people are moving. And what, if you think about it now, if people are moving around, the comfort zone is global, you can basically live anywhere. What becomes important? Where it's good to live, right? Why should you go through humiliating immigration interviews where during every step you are tried to be proved to be wrong? You are tried to make, you are feeling that you are not welcome in the country. Why should you live in a country where you spend 20% of your time on bureaucracy? Why should you take that time away from your family, your work? So the user experience of a country, something that is actually relevant today for most of our services, most of the companies that we're building, we're talking about the user experience. but we are not yet talking about the user experience of the country. But if the user experience of the country fails, people will not move there because, like, in all honesty, who would want to move behind a wall, right? And I think during my entrepreneurial kind of journeys, I have also, one of the things I have done is I helped to launch, in the mid-2000s, I helped to launch MTV, and it was the kind of later days of MTV, and one of the kind of similarities that I'm seeing, so what changed in the music industry? There was a revolutionary change that happened, that changed music industry so much that making MTV was almost impossible, and that was MP3. The format of MP3s is because you had mega artists who had labels behind them, and only they could foster. So everybody was kind of following the same artist. The tastes were very similar. You kind of had little bit different angles, but still, it was all kind of mainstream. When suddenly with MP3, what happened was that anybody could become an artist. You could set up a studio in your living room, become an artist. And what happened with people, as the consumers, what changed for us was the fact that suddenly we didn't want to be mainstream anymore. Each of us wants to have a specific taste, wants to listen to the music that all the neighbors are not listening. So that totally changed our consumption of music. And observing what's going on with the countries and cities, I'm seeing similar behavior with movement. It used to be that you had to move to London or San Francisco or New York in order to live the dotted life to success, whereas today it seems that people are wanting more and more to live extraordinary lives in extraordinary places, which actually opens up a whole new market for talent for many of us who are building our companies in those corners of the world. And there are today 420 million people who are ready to move for career. And it's actually a great news because, as Time magazine said, people with more experiences in different cultures are more able to generate different ideas and unexpected links for concepts. And what it actually means is that increasing mobility helps us to build more creative teams. That's a good thing. So let's look at the numbers. Let's look at where are the people who are moving the most. Where are the highly skilled migrants coming from? And it's interesting because that has changed a lot during the previous years as well. So in 2000, number one source of highly skilled migrants was UK. Whereas in 2010, it was India, Philippines, and China. And noting the same Professor Kishore Mahbubani from Singapore University in his book, Can Asians Think?, has discovered that 90% of PhDs in the physical sciences and engineering are held by Asians living in Asia. 90%. That's quite a lot of people. But again, for Europe, it's actually a good news because we have gaps to fill. The European Commission has forecasted that by 2020, there will be 900,000 people, lack of 900,000 people from the ICT sector. So all seems kind of good, but now looking at the reality, I think one of the big things about European workforce and the future of European work will be dependent on a very simple thing, the comfort zone of a founder, the comfort zone of the hiring teams. Because one of the things, working with the companies across 44 countries today, one of the things I keep asking myself and the companies that we work with, are we hiring the best people for our companies, or are we hiring the ones that are most comfortable hiring, are most similar to us, most familiar to work with? And if I would have got a penny where every time somebody tells me that we are only hiring culture fit, I would be a millionaire. And I totally understand where that comes from. Organizations from Southeast Asia, Latin America, Europe, Africa, everybody has the same notion. We're hiring culture fit. And I understand where it comes from, but let's look at it a little bit. If you think about an organization, then in a way, I would look at organization like a human being. So imagine that you are a 20-year-old and you're saying that I'm only accepting from life everything that fits me. I'm already ready, and everything that comes has to be fit me, which means that I will not grow. As a person, I will not grow, I will not evolve. And I think, in a way, this is something for us to think about as well when we're building our organizations, is are we hiring people who are similar to us, who fit what we are already, or are we hiring people who are adding the experience to their organization, who are adding and helping our organizations to actually grow and mature? And we talk a lot about Silicon Valley. There's no tech conference on the planet Earth I have seen that doesn't have somebody from Silicon Valley talking about how Silicon Valley is so great and how all those great companies have been built. And let's look at Silicon Valley a little bit. Silicon Valley is one of the diversest tech areas of the world. 74% of computer science workers between 25 and 44 are foreign-born. So it's actually diversity that makes Silicon Valley great. And inside that kind of thinking, I have looked at my team and our team, because today I have a team of 23 people from 10 nationalities. And I have thought about why is it so? Of course, the fact that I believe in diversity definitely helps, but why is it that for us, we have managed to build from the very day one a team that is really not defining people based on their passports, but just based on the skills. We're trying to find the best people from the whole planet instead of looking for the comfortable. And I started to realize it's not me. It's actually the fact that we have hired a gatekeeper who comes from that diverse background. Alina is our head of talent, and she has the background of Silicon Valley, where she was doing recruiting for Google, for Evernote. And I started to realize the fact that she doesn't have that bias. She came from the environment where diversity was normal, that you had all sorts of people, all sorts of backgrounds. It doesn't matter how complicated it is to pronounce a name. You just look at the person and the person's skills. So in that sense, one of the things for us to think about is who are the gatekeepers of our company and how to help them become over the biases that may actually limit to enrich the culture of our organizations. Because interestingly, McKinsey has also discovered that companies with a higher racial and ethnic diversity are actually also performing better financially compared to the average in their sectors. So I think the good news is that there is, talent shortage is a mismatch of locations. There are people, they are just in different places. There are organizations who need them, and they are also different places. The good news is that traveling and mobility has not been as flexible as it is today. So, and when looking at the diversity again, then there was actually an interesting fact that over half of the unicorns from the United States are founded by immigrants. So again, let's encourage that in Europe as well. As the talent team is moving, then one of my favorite things when I heard working with an international talent community in Jobbatical was when a marketer who had moved from Minnesota to Estonia. 10 years ago, believe me, if I would have asked anybody from my school to move to Estonia, they would have never done it. But so there's a story. Björn moved from Minnesota to Estonia, and what he told his team after working with them for a year was that 10% of people wake up excited about their jobs. I had to move from Minnesota to Estonia to become one of the 10%. And I think this is something that I really want to encourage in Europe, is keeping an open mind, and I think we will be able to fill the gaps with the current talent mobility that is encouraging to build great companies also from Europe. So thank you very much, and I'm ready for questions. Anybody wants to ask a question? No, you're almost like in Northern Europe. It's always the funny thing when you go between, next week I will be in Japan, and then I will be in Malaysia, and then I will be in Singapore, and constantly traveling. You see all those different audiences, and one of the things that is, I think, kind of cute is the way we behave. And I think in Northern Europe, we have a lot of kind of Germanic order and kind of behavior perfection, and we are also very bad at asking questions. So if there's anybody who wants to ask questions, then feel free to do it. Otherwise, I will leave the stage. Thank you very much. So, I'm sorry? Did you have a question? Oh, sorry, I didn't see that.
Can you please just tell us a bit more about your project and what you're actually doing? Because the lecture was really interesting, but I'm excited to know what you have.
Jobbatical, I founded Jobbatical 2 years ago, and Jobbatical is a platform where we collect globally minded companies who are lacking certain skills locally, and we collect them to a community. So we have a community, monthly 120,000 people of tech and marketing and business development skills, and who are looking to relocate. So basically, all the people who join Jobbatical would like to work in another country, and we connect them to the companies who are unable to find certain skills locally. And that's when we see all those trends, like there are people moving from Brazil to Italy or Brazil to Germany, or so really looking at the trajectories of people today. That's kind of the basis of what I was talking today as well. So we currently work across 44 countries, mainly in Europe and Southeast Asia, but also with some companies in Colombia, for example, in Latin America, Costa Rica, all the exciting places where you can combine. Basically, our encouragement is that instead of going to visit, for example, visit Berlin for a week, why not go and work for some years in a company and actually have a local experience in that country, in that city, with those people? So that's what we do. Oh, thank you.
Hi, thanks for a great talk. I'm a professor of computer information science at an American college. And my question to you is, as the skills transfer from one part of the world to the other, are there any certain minimum qualifications academically that your organization looks for?
I think it's a good question, because I think it is getting more and more flurry about the academic requirements and versus the actual hands-on experience. So what we are seeing across all those countries that we work, it is mainly what the employers are looking for is the hands-on experience. Are you a Java developer, or are you a digital marketer? We want to see, or companies want to see what has been your working experience. And I think it's a bit challenging, because you have to get your first working experience in order to qualify for a job. And then, but this is, I think, what we are seeing. It's becoming less and less important what your actual educational background is, whereas what is your actually hands-on working experience. Did that answer your question? Anybody else?
Any other questions for Karoli before she leaves us this afternoon? Okay, with that, we say thank you so much, Karoli. Hindriks from Jobbatical.